Hello friends, it's me, Tristan, your plucky dungeoneer. Today we're going to be making a dungeon based off the region map we made in the last video. I'm calling this one the Halls of the Dragonhorn. Maybe working title. I love making dungeons from scratch. There's something about adding in your own traps and puzzles into a dangerous adventure. It just makes it so much more fun than using the pre-made stuff. Pre-made dungeons are not a problem. Those are great too in a pinch. I just kind of prefer building my own thing. So firstly, I've sketched out the general layout of the map as well as a 3/4 view of the dungeon just for artistic rendering purposes. So that way when I go and design this and add it into the battle mat later on, I can, tweak things. I know where things are placed, but I can still tweak them and change them. In the 3/4 map, I've added in the finer details like water rising in the two rooms, in two of the rooms. A couple of combat encounters, and at the bottom you can see I've sketched in the boss monster in the room. One thing I rarely state on my maps directly is the objective. I tend to keep that idea in my mind more than I do lay it out, because the party might change the task whenever they feel fit, and sometimes so do you. Sometimes you change the task as well, depending on what the story is. Sometimes the party dictates what the story is going to be, because in the moment, you've kind of come up with a better idea than when you had originally planned for the dungeon. So, for now, let's say that the objective here is to get to this draconic statue. Who put it there? And why did they put it there? Well, I mean, you can always assume dragon cultists. I mean, who doesn't love a good dragon cultist, really? But I'm assuming they built it, since they're always up to some weird, shady stuff. But the why? Oh, that'll forever be a mystery, since they've long since been dealt with. Maybe you go a little darker here and you add in their floating bodies in the waters that they must traverse, or maybe you find some evidence of their leavings in one of the rooms. Maybe you find a small journal from some. You can always go Resident Evil style and just write out the typical, I'm dying of a zombie plague and therefore here's my last words in detail as I go through them. Now, when I get into drawing these kinds of maps, I'm grabbing my plotting tools, my graph paper, everything you could use to help you map something out like this. When I plot a map, I like precision just because I use a vinyl battle mat for my games, as I mentioned earlier. If the dungeon is small enough, I can translate the whole map onto the battle mat ahead of the game. That's a fun little trick I like to do, if I can. In this case, I've designed this map to be only 7 rooms, excluding the staircases and hallways, so it can be easily translated onto a battle mat. The trick I find with this stuff, though, is that if you aren't using a vinyl mat and instead of using terrain tiles or pre-made maps to proxy in some squares, that's okay. I like being precise, but to be perfectly honest, that precision is only necessary for the way I work. However you work and however you want to make your maps, that's good for you. If you find that mapping out your map using tin cans centered around a piece of corkboard or something, that's okay. Do that. Whatever works for you. But regardless, I have a fresh book of dot paper, so I'm using what I got. It's been calling to me for like the last month. A key thing I do here when putting the final pencil to paper is that now I can adjust the map to fit how I want and add whatever details I'd like. I'm adding in this lake of fire and molten rock, and that I had it sketched in, so I have a reference of it. But small aspects like the flooded rooms are harder to translate onto paper. I find that if you need a way to keep track of what each room has in it, I have in the past made a legend on the side of the dungeon, and on an opposite page of the map detailed what rooms do what, and what encounters were there. Those I typically use when I design much larger dungeons. Now, this Dragon Shrine dungeon could be the beginning of a mega dungeon though, so if you had ideas to move past this, then you could easily expand on what is here. I'm for sure going to make one of those mega dungeons for this channel, and that'll be a big project, but for now, let's just keep it simple. You know, we're just starting off. But once I've started adding in the finer details with ink, well, now I get to make this into a little bit of an art project. I mean, that's kind of the point of all this, right? But there's something incredibly relaxing about adding in these little dark areas through cross-hatching and blacking out the parts of the map. It's just, I don't know, meditative, relaxing, and is part of the DMing experience that I find that gets glossed over. Some of this stuff is just a lot of relaxation work, meditative, easy work to do. Like I said, cross-hatching, adding in hash marks, blacking out parts of the map. Those sorts of things. Drawing your own little tiles individually on the squares in the map. Stuff like that, while seems boring, I find personally gets me in kind of a meditative mood and can easily get me to relax and enjoy what I'm doing, and it gets the mind flowing a little more. It gets me thinking of like, oh, why did I put a spring trap here? What kind of monsters are in this dungeon? And this is when I start kind of thinking about this stuff. I usually just design the layout first, and then when I go to add in the writing portion of this game, at that point is when I will go, oh, there are kobolds here. They taken over the dungeon now and are using the cultists' old gear to keep prospecting people away. Or, oh no, this is filled with undead creatures. There are skeletons everywhere. Or no, demons took this place over. Demons are using this, and they are using the protection of the giant dragon that's sleeping underneath the ground to make their way into the world, and using this area as a way to ward off would-be travelers that are going to stop them from spilling out into the material plane. Stuff like that. That's where my mind tends to wander. It's also a good time just to simply relax and enjoy the act of making this map. Especially when you are just hashing in the added little marks to fill out the map. I find that's a good time just to look back on what you've already made and enjoy it. That's the main thing. So I find that the cross-hatching and hash marking the walls of the dungeon also gives me a better indicator as well of where a player could feasibly go in this place. This is not just... it's not just for relaxation's sake. This is actually a thing that I do for a specific reason. To me, the hash-marked walls I've made here indicate that a player would need proper tools to get through these walls, or would need a spell to bypass this much stone. And then finally getting down to the puzzle portion of the map. Because these are important. Not everybody wants to do puzzles, and that's fine. But I love giving my players a good puzzle. You can make these puzzles simple skill checks, or to be something more involved. I've had success in both regions of just, hey, you get to this this puzzle room, the chamber is filling with gas, what do you do? Okay, give me skill checks to bypass the puzzle. And then we'll just narrate it from there. But if your group is a little more puzzle-oriented like mine is, I tend to find that I like giving them actual things to do here. Switches to pull, tactile things to add into the room to make this work. So for my group, I know that using this dungeon, once they get into the flooded section, they're going to want to find a way into the next room. Now, for me, what I've done here, in my mind, is that the first door, that is simply just a locked door. They need to bypass that. It's a moderately hard check. And then the rest of the room is still flooded. If they had made their investigation checks, or done the investigative work to find the small tunnel that drains water into this room, then they could potentially plug that. They could also potentially use a pump to get this water out of here. I would say that the city that's near this dungeon would have sufficient access to something like a pumping mechanism to get this water out of here if they could somehow stop the rest of the water from getting in. You could also, in my mind, this is how it should work, drain the room using these loose tiles on the floor. Now, what I've thought about this is that each tile you can actually pick up off the floor. They're heavy, but it can be done with 1 or 2 people. And then put them aside, and then you have access to a better drainage system, which is just pure ground. And you'll notice that, okay, this dungeon, this room specifically is built over this graded area, and it drains into a room below, or through porous rock, or those sorts of things. Now, I run my games more sandbox style, so how the players get past this, though, that's up to them. Because of that, I feel as if One of the options that they could also explore is simply trying to open up the next door, whether that's through a lockpicking check or through some other mechanical means. Of course, they would find themselves hurled into this room full of molten rock and fire and a fire golem. But, I mean, that's up to them. I always, of course, give my players a, like, oh crap check to save themselves, whether that's a thing they want to try and do that they've come up with to save themselves, or I would just offer a dexterity saving throw or something equivalent if you're using a different system. Regardless, that's kind of how I do things that way. Just simply put, like, you know, obviously you don't want your players spilling into this room and then just instantly being dropped into the pool of molten rock, the lava, the magma, and just simply having the golem sit aside and just go like, oh yeah, that happened. My job here is done. Protection. Perfectly done. I mean, as funny as that would be. You don't always want that to happen. So, of course, just have them, you know, make their rolls, get inside. Even if they fail, have them fail loosely, you know. Like, ooh, they dipped a toe in the molten rock. You just sort of got burned. You're not dead. Maybe you, like, just got a good singe, but you're fine. The key here, though, is that for my dungeons, I do always add a different, equally treacherous path for my players to take. Now, the flooded rooms to the more left-hand side of the dungeon, that I would say, I guess that'd be right. Yeah, the right-hand side of the dungeon would actually be more so the main path. Like, I would say that's your main way to go through. The obvious way is this, with some very obvious difficulty in getting to the main room to get to the statue. The other way, of course, you have to make mention of this if they actually do go this way, is that there is a blocked doorway using stone, but with just enough space between the stones and the ceiling to squeeze through here. But of course, taking this path will require some taxing climbing checks, because once you enter this next room, that's when they notice, oh, there's a chasm here, and a room across the way, and one directly below it. About, let's say, 60 feet, give or take. What that means then, though, is that they'll either need to jump across, get across somehow, and then climb down, or climb down, then swing across is also an option. But, of course, if they don't explore the room adjacent to the one they're climbing down from, then obviously they'll get attacked by some horrible thing, kobolds throwing fire bombs, or some skeletons shooting arrows at them, or maybe go back to the demons. These demons just send out methods that just explode on them and on sight just to try and mess with them climbing up the wall, you know. And as a final bit of clarity, I like to toss on a bit of ink wash over across all of this. Usually, I do this just to make the obvious paths pop out to me. And I do this also so in case I'm giving this to somebody to use, they have the obvious paths marked out in like clear black and white. And then the stuff that can't be bypassed is shaded in and hashed and that sort of stuff. I always find that certain aspects could use clarification, like the room directly below the one across the chasm. In my mind, they're nearly identical rooms, but of course, because you're going to be putting stuff that is different in there, I would say the one below this one is maybe a treasury. Maybe it's picked clean. You find open treasure chests. You could also put a small encounter in there as well. Or maybe you could put like something mystical in there, but that's totally up for you to decide. Essentially, you know, whatever you want to go for is fine. If you want to use this dungeon, I'll for sure put this on my Twitter page and maybe add a little bit of a link in the description or something like that. And that way you can access this and use it for your own nefarious reasons. However, if you're more inclined to draw your own map, then you could simply use this as inspiration. Of course, inspiration is free. Anyway, this is the Plucky Dungeoneer signing off, and you have a wonderful day.